It is the purpose of this video to present the findings of on-site explorations, surveys, and scans of the CSS Richmond's wreckage, rather than a recitation of her broader history. An understanding of what the CSS Richmond looked like, her construction, and the nomenclature of her hull is also necessary to fully understand the information in this presentation. Any plans or blueprints of the CSS Richmond likely were destroyed when the city of Richmond was burned and evacuated by Confederate forces in early April of 1865. However, there are original detailed drawings that survived of the Richmond class of ironclads, a 1902 drawing of her and contemporary drawings and models based on these sources. This model by Andy Hall is a good representation of what CSS Richmond's exterior may have looked like. Note the smokestack and pilot house on top of her casemate and armor-plated shield. Also, the ports of her cannons, which are believed to have been 4 7-inch Brooks, each weighing about 15,000 pounds. Looking at the interior, beginning at her bottom, we have the hold deck. Here, you might find her powder magazines, coal bunkers, engines, boilers, propeller shaft, and other machinery and stores. Above that, the berth deck. Here could be found the officers' quarters, wardroom, galley, ship's stores, and other supplies. Above that, the gun deck with its cannons, weapons, accoutrements, the pilot's wheel, and possibly where crewmen hung their hammocks during times of inaction. In this sectional view, once again beginning at the hold deck, you will find, along with all other machinery, her massive boilers. They were so large that they extended up through the berth deck. Note the large diameter pipes on top of the boilers. There is a double-walled, upright, riveted pipe about 54 inches in diameter on the wreck site that could have been one of these pipes. For identification purposes, Bill and Mike refer to it as the smokestack base. Above the berth deck, you can see the gun deck, knuckle, and casemate, or roof as it is called at times, and the smokestack. There are several things that make the CSS Richmond unique. She was built at the Gosport Navy Yard, Portsmouth, Virginia, the same yard where the Merrimack, shown here, was converted to the ironclad CSS Virginia. Construction began on the Richmond in March of 1862, the same month the CSS Virginia fought her epic battle with the USS Monitor. She was the first ironclad to be built from the keel up in Virginia. The Richmond was arguably the longest-serving ironclad in the Confederate Navy. In early May of 1862, Norfolk fell and the unfinished Richmond was towed upriver to her namesake city to be completed. By September, she was finished and began her role as guardian of the capital of the Confederacy. This wash drawing done in 1902 by R.G. Scarrett shows the CSS Richmond patrolling the James River with either the ironclad Fredericksburg or Virginia II in the background. These three ironclads, along with numerous other defenses, were a major deterrent to the Federal Navy and their plans to attack Richmond. These ironclads fought several battles with the Union Navy, but remained basically chained bulldogs guarding the capital at Richmond. The Richmond's fate and those of other ironclads were determined when Petersburg fell to the Union Army and Admiral Raphael Semmes was ordered to scuttle the ironclads and other vessels under his command. The orders to do so came late on April 2, 1865, as Semmes sat down to eat his supper. He and the men under his command only had hours to provision themselves and destroy their ships. In the wee hours of April 3rd, thunderous explosions were heard in Richmond as the flames reached the ammunition magazines on several of these ships. This map shows the approximate location where the federally protected remains of the ironclads CSS Fredericksburg and Virginia 2 lie opposite Drury's Bluff. Further downriver at the next bend can be seen the site where the CSS Richmond was scuttled off Chaffin's Bluff. It must be noted here that there were a few post-war references that stated the Fredericksburg was sunk at Chaffin's Bluff rather than the Richmond. However, Benjamin Malafert was awarded a contract by the government in late 1870 to salvage the Fredericksburg at Drury's Bluff, and Peter C. Asserson purchased the CSS Richmond lying off Chaffin's Bluff from the Treasury Department in January of 1871. Nusbaum and Waldrop have no reason at this point to challenge what the federal government believed and acted on. As you will see later, Mike and Bill found massive damage to the 27-inch thick casemate of the Richmond, as though an explosion occurred at that point. This drawing illustrates what may have happened if it did blow out. Water would have come pouring in, causing her to list rapidly, and with the combined weight of all items, like her 4 15,000-pound cannons, to slide to the low side. To date, no eyewitness report has been found stating exactly what happened to sink her that night. On April the 25th, 1865, Union Admiral William Radford reported that the Richmond was abreast of Chaffin's Bluff, had been scuttled but not blown up, and probably easily raised. On June 21st, Radford reported upon further investigation that she lies on her side and can easily be raised. It is supposed she is uninjured. This drawing shows her in that approximate position. The river depth was around 40 feet at that time, as it is today, and with a total hole width of at least 40 feet, her knuckle would have been fairly close to the surface. No government-sanctioned action was taken to salvage these vessels until 1870, when the government was compelled to remove these obstructions to ensure safe navigation for vessels trafficking the river to the port of Richmond. As contracts were to be let and work to begin, the James was hit in September with a flood of 30 feet above its normal level, which changed the condition of numerous wrecks. Peter C. Asserson of Hebrew and Asserson, who soon purchased the Richmond from the Treasury Department for $300, reported in his offer of December the 7th, 1870, that the Richmond has since turned bottom up. This drawing shows her in that position as she lies to this day. Mr. Asserson, shown here, was a naval officer during the war and was ironically stationed at Gosport Naval Yard after the war. During those post-war years, numerous naval ships were being raised and salvaged right in front of that yard. He retired from the Navy in 1869 to pursue the wrecking business himself and began operations on the CSS Richmond in 1871. On July the 11th, the Daily State Journal, a Richmond newspaper, reported that he was working from an old whaler, built in the days of Noah, and that the work was a serious one, as many of the irons have to be removed piece by piece. It was also reported that her powder tanks were removed from the magazine and the powder was found to be dry, although submerged for more than 5 years. A bank failure in 1872 forced him to return to the Navy as one of her first civil engineers, retiring in 1901 after a successful career. Forgotten for 114 years, parts of the wreckage would be rediscovered in 1985 by author Clive Cussler along with his NUMA and UAJV crews as they searched for the lost Confederate fleet. Unfortunately, they had little time to explore her. In the summer of 1993, Professor Gordon Watts of Tidewater Atlantic Research and his team did an extensive survey of her remains for the Army Corps of Engineers. This drawing from his report shows that the remains of the Richmond lie at an angle to and near the center of the channel in about 35 to 40 feet of water. This drawing shows the results of Watts' survey. Here we see what Watts called Feature K, a hanging knee, a possible smokestack base, the edge of her upturned casemate, and two mysterious iron boxes. Are they a part of the ship's original equipment? Or could they have been filled with gunpowder and used by sailors to demolish the ship? Further excavation may one day solve the mystery. Dr. Mike Nusbaum decided in 2010 to begin an effort to explore and document the remains of the CSS Richmond. To him, it seemed so one-sided to spend millions on the USS Monitor, which is 16 miles offshore and under 200 feet of corrosive salt water, and not to do the same on a Confederate ironclad to represent the other side of that epic battle. Today, there is little left of the Merrimac, but her sister ship, the Richmond, lies about 9 miles from Richmond in 30 to 40 feet of fresh water, for the most part covered by the James River's preservative mud. Mike and Bill's explorations have convinced them that she is a national treasure. One of the realities about taking the time to survey a shipwreck is that what you may have seen and learned has no lasting value until you photograph and/or measure it and put those results on paper. This drawing, done in 2015, shows several exposed features: a possible smokestack base, what initially seemed to be the gun deck framing, and what appears to be a hatchway with a coaming under it. In 2016, it was discovered that the upturned edge of the casemate was exposed. Note the red arrow pointing to the area downriver where there seems to be massive damage. Also, note the red arrow pointed at the massive damage to this end of the exposed casemate edge. As far down as Mike and Bill could excavate by hand, the 22-inch thick wood and 5 inches of iron armor are broken out and shattered. To accurately position these features, several control points were established for the necessary trilateration as shown in Figure 18. They were placed at the prominent points circled in red. This compass, fabricated by Bill, is 2 feet in diameter, marked in 2-degree increments, and slides over a pole that can be mounted securely at the measured control points. It has a swing arm on center so that a measuring tape can be attached, and you can also set the degrees in relation to any object under it and keep it from turning with a knob. It took many dives and extensive time to obtain the dimensions shown here. The visibility is very limited, and great care had to be taken in setting up several of these compasses to ensure accuracy while taking measurements. Also, note the sectional view of the hatchway in the lower right-hand corner, which has been flipped right side up, showing the coaming on the deck. Those exposed and measured features have been overlaid on one of several drawings made of this ship by David Meagher, who has drawn plans of numerous Civil War-era ships. This overlay was done to illustrate what a small portion of this wreck is exposed and how much larger the site plan needs to be. Mike and Bill have an uphill battle each year as they try to do so. This drawing gives you some idea of where Gordon Watt's Feature K is located on their site plan. This feature could be part of an intact knuckle and is located downriver from the other exposed features. This cutaway or sectional view of what Mike and Bill have designated Beam Plus One was measured and drawn at the end of the 2016 season and shows that beam's exact position in relation to the exposed upturned edge of the casemate. Once Bill had drawn it, he realized that he and Mike could not be looking at the underside of the gun deck as was first believed, but possibly the berth deck instead. The timber sizes were too small to support a 15,000-pound cannon. Also, this feature was too high above the casemate edge to be a gun deck beam. To clarify this, it was necessary to examine surviving copies of original drawings made of the Richmond class of ironclads. John L. Porter, pictured here, created these drawings as he was tasked with the design of this class of ironclads. Porter first conceived the idea of an ironclad warship in 1846 while employed as a constructor for the U.S. Navy at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Porter first conceived the idea of an ironclad warship in 1846 while employed as a constructor for the U.S. Navy at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He submitted his plan to the Navy Department for consideration on the Allegheny, an iron-hulled steamer he was then designing. His plan was rejected at that time by the U.S. Navy, but in 1861 was approved by Stephen Mallory, Secretary of the Confederate Navy, to be used on the Merrimac. This is Porter's drawing showing the framing details and in many cases the timber sizes. In 2018, we discovered these dimensions were very close to those which we have found on the Richmond. For example, the berth deck beam is 7 inches thick on this drawing. Beam plus 1 and beam 0 are both 7 1/4 inches thick. Porter shows that the gun deck beam is 10 inches thick. When it was finally found on the wreck, it measured 11 inches thick. To account for the slight discrepancy, one has to ask, does wood swell when it gets wet? This is another one of Porter's drawings, and shows many of the spikes used to attach these timbers, and this too proved to be accurate. The ones that are encountered on the wreck range in size from 3/4 inch to 1 1/4 inch in diameter. This drawing was made during the winter of 2016 to calculate how far down the run of the upturned casemate edge the gun deck might be below beam plus 1. By using known angles and dimensions from their surveys, and coupling that with Mr. Porter's drawing scaled to fit, they realized too late in the 2016 season that they were within a foot of where the gun deck beam should be. The dashed line represents the missing and torn away hole, probably done for the most part when she was salvaged in 1871. Their plan for the 2017 season was to pick up where they left off and find the gun deck beam. Nature and fate had a different plan for them. Mike Nusbaum was unable to dive after early July of 2017 due to medical reasons, but wanted Bill to continue nevertheless. To add to their sorrows that year, they found that the spring flooding had hopelessly buried the casemate edge and most other parts of the wreckage. Realizing that finding the gun deck beam was no longer an option, Bill began mapping other features he and Mike had wondered about, such as the hatchway opening in Feature K. He started with the hatchway, which is shown here. Note the plan view at the lower left, the sectional views above it, and also at lower right, a sectional view showing how they might feel the underside of the casemate roof by probing down the hatchway opening. Here you can see that each probe position at the red circles is numbered and measured from above the hatchway. Note that in the lower left corner the hatchway timbers were exposed, but the overburden rose rather quickly to a depth of about 30 inches diagonally across the opening. Here you can see that each probe position at the red circles is numbered and measured from above the hatchway. Note that in the lower left corner the hatchway timbers were exposed, but the overburden rose rather quickly to a depth of about 30 inches diagonally across the opening. For this reason, Bill was unable to accurately probe across the entire area as he desired. This drawing shows the measured distances where probing was done as well as the timber sizes. Note that the dashed lines represent timbers that were buried beneath the overburden. Solid lines are used where the timbers were exposed. The rectangular feature with 8 bolts fastening it to the center of beam 0 is an 8-inch by 14-inch by 2-inch thick piece of hardwood that has a 2-inch square mortise in it. This may have served as a bed for the tenon on a pillar or a stanchion post to fit in to support the deck amidships. Here you will see that a level was placed on an angle iron fixed 1 foot high above the corner of the hatchway by a 4-foot long piece of all-thread rod driven vertically down. This served as a radius point. The other end is clamped to a movable rod on the left with vice grips clamped down when level. This was done above each numbered probe position and the depth recorded where wood was hit. You will notice that wood is struck at 3 different depths. Realize you are facing fore and aft on the wreck. This drawing shows the results of the probing as if you were viewing it from port to starboard. Note that the timber framing the hatchway is pitched down. Also, probe number 3, which is in the corner, is slightly higher in this drawing and in figure 31. Once these dimensions were added to his drawing, Beale began to wonder if his probe was striking a set of upside-down steps within the hatchway, and if position number 3 is actually the stringer board on the end of the steps. With the 2017 season running out, it was time for Beale to turn his focus on Feature K. This is a side view of Feature K. At 36 inches tall, it stands up higher above the bottom than any other feature downriver from the other exposed wreckage. The large timbers, similar construction to the casemate, certain angles, and its distance away from the upriver wreckage leads Mike and Beale to wonder if it was a section of the knuckle near the flat-decked stern or bow. Shown here is an end view of this feature as seen from the right side of the previous drawing. As you can see, it is leaned over and constructed of large timbers. The colored areas in this drawing are real. The feature marked A is not there, but something was once attached here. Therefore, realize the thickness and shape are pure speculation. The planking marked B and the timbers outlined with longer dashes are there, but below the mud. Beale found it interesting that the angle at one end is the same as the angle of the casemate, 35 degrees. This drawing represents what this structure might look like if it were turned upright. Again, note the timber is at 35 degrees, which is the same angle of the casemate. To discover what purpose Feature K really served will require further investigation in the future. The 2018 season providentially began with Dr. Nusbaum's return to health and an incredible opportunity for us. In early April, Brian Abbott and David Thompson of Nautilus Marine Group planned to use their Kronsberg Mesotech 1000 sector scanner, shown here, to survey the Revolutionary War shipwrecks at Yorktown for Dr. Broadwater and others. Upon completion, they volunteered to come and survey the Richmond for us on April the 12th. Here it can be seen on the dock at Osborne's Landing, being held by sponsor Ryan Johnston. The purpose of the tripod is to hold the scanner in a vertical fixed position, no matter how inclined the river bottom may be. The scanner can be raised and lowered numerous times by 2 men on deck, at multiple locations around a wreck, and later the individual scans can be stitched together for a composite image. This incredible scan was done at a 30-foot diameter. The arrows point to a feature Mike and Beale believe may be the smokestack base and the channel edge of the upturned casemate. It seemed to them that spring flooding had uncovered the casemate edge once again. The triangle with a circle around it at the center of the image is actually the scanner head, and its tripod, which is also recorded as the scanner rotates. When asked to explain the significance of the lighter and darker areas, Mr. Abbott told them to imagine that the scanner was emitting light instead of sonic beams as the scanner head rotated 360 degrees. Objects or other features facing it would appear lighter, and those on the backside would appear darker, as though they were in a shadow. In this scan, you not only see the features that are mentioned, but logs and debris casting shadows as they stick up above the bottom. You can also see the buildup of sediment caused by these obstructions. This scan is from the same spot, but expanded out to a 120-foot diameter. For Mike and Bill, this image was a real revelation. Since the visibility at this site varies from a few inches at worst to about 3 feet at best, it is very hard to imagine what the whole site could look like. This scan showed them for the first time how the wreck has impacted the channel. Looking at the image, the darker area above the casemate edge is the deepest part of the channel, and you can see the direction of the river flow due to the streaks of light and dark areas. Notice that the edge of the casemate and the wreck is at an angle to the current direction. Upon close examination, you can also see that it catches everything floating along the bottom, which forms snags and causes a constantly changing terrain of scours and bars. Each year they find the debris and terrain to be different. The 2017 season was the worst. At the beginning of their 2018 season, Mike and Bill discovered that the spring flood had indeed scoured out the area where beam +1 is located, as well as the channel side of the upturned casemate. Something in the channel may have diverted the current toward this area. Even so, they had to do some limited digging to measure all the features shown above the red dotted line in this sectional drawing. They were very excited to discover that the gun deck beam is actually there. It is 11 inches thick and 14 inches wide. Note the waterway and what could be the remnant of a whale leaned over on the casemate. Also, the deck planking and especially the iron object passing through the very large timber near the center of the drawing. They examined this feature closely, trying to determine its purpose. More on that later. Realize everything below the brown line and to the left of the red dotted line is speculative, as it is buried. Bill and Mike are often asked, as you are digging down on this site, what kind of things are you finding in the mud? Their short answer is, a whole lot of debris and trash. As this part of the casemate is facing upriver, it is obvious to them that over the decades it has been uncovered and recovered numerous times. Along with all kinds of logs and sticks, they have found plastic bags and bottles, several dodgeballs, Venetian blind slats, tennis shoes, and so forth. In this picture, Bill is holding a beer can that was about 2 feet under the casemate and amazingly almost touching the iron armor. Also, a baseball cap which was beside the gun deck beam. On a previous dive, he found a 1999 Sammy Sosa Build-A-Bear in the same vicinity. In this drawing, Bill inserted what is missing, the knuckle, whale planking, and frame timber. This was done to determine the width of the knuckle. Given the timbers and features that do exist and using dimensions displayed in Porter's drawings, it appears by scale that her knuckle was 6 feet wide. There were some historic records that give it as 4 feet and some that say 6 feet. When Bill drew this in, he could not see how it could have been 4 feet. The drawing on the left is a sectional view of her sloped casemate. The innermost layer of iron bars is laid horizontally and 2 inches thick. Right on top of that, laid perpendicular, is a 1 inch by 8 inch piece with a 2 inch by 8 inch bar directly above it, thus giving her 5 inches of armor plating. This varies from early 1862 Union reports which claimed that her iron plating was only 4 inches thick. This could be explained by the fact that the CSS Richmond was towed to her namesake city in early May without her iron plating. They could not have known what was finally installed. Her iron, supplied by Tredegar Iron Works, was applied at Richmond during the summer of 1862. The drawing on the right is another sectional drawing of how the knuckle may have been constructed. Bill and Mike found that the first spikes were driven in at 9.5 inches from the end of the plates and right in the center of the bars. Note that although they know the position and layers of iron on the upper side of the casemate, the iron on the underside of the knuckle is missing for the most part. There are a few iron fasteners sticking out of the underside about 2 inches high, but it cannot be determined yet what the thickness actually may have been. This is a plan view of the drawing in Figure 40. Once again, note the round iron object near the center of the drawing. It is iron, 8.5 inches in diameter, has a square piece 1/2 inch thick, and 3.5 by 3.5 inches cast as one on the top end. This object passes through the mass of 10 inch by 20 inch timber and has some clearance around the bored hole as though it was meant to rotate. For Mike and Bill, the question became, what would be on the gun deck that would need to be rotated and have such a heavy timber up under it? These features were discovered and measured on their last full day of the season. It would not be until these dimensions were added to the drawings that it would dawn on them what it might be. They realized more research was needed to confirm what this feature may be. This drawing is a flipped over side view enlargement of that feature. Note its position and loose deck planking to its left, also the middle plank. Something hit it with enough force that the spike was pulled clean through the 3-inch thick plank. After drawing this, Bill realized that this could indeed be a pivot point for a cannon carriage. He turned to the internet and entered the search phrase, naval gun carriage for a 7-inch Brooke cannon. What he found is this drawing of a Brooke cannon and carriage on the gun deck of the Confederate ironclad CSS Texas, which was captured in an unfinished condition at the Richmond Naval Yard. This drawing was arranged and executed by the superintendent and constructor of naval gun carriages at Richmond, Virginia in 1864. Note the pivot point as it passes through the deck and the plate at the very bottom. This is an enlargement of that feature. Could the iron object on the Richmond be a pivot point for a Brooke cannon carriage directly below that 20-inch by 10-inch beam? It is slightly lean and crushed into the side of the gun deck beam as it would be as the ship rolled over. After drawing this, Bill sadly realized that his hand was probably within a foot or so of discovering the truth when they ended their season. More mysteries waiting to be solved next.